Good morning, afternoon, or evening, whatever it is for you. My name is James, and welcome to episode 4 of the Writing with James podcast, coming to you almost live from my living room to talk about life, the universe, and things you didn't want to hear in the first place. As promised, we are going to get into 3 more strange but true stories. Like last time, these are stories about regular people and bizarre situations. There is something of a running theme this time, though, as all of these stories come off a little uneventful until we get to the twist that changes everything. I will go into a little bit about a potential future podcast episode at the end, but if you were just here for the stories, we're going to get right into it. But I'm going to follow a piece of advice I received some time ago. If you would like to support the Writing with James podcast or Review from the Middle YouTube channel, a subscribe is all I ask. If you would like to do more, there are links in the description and on the homepage to buy merch, or you can buy me a cup of coffee at the coffee link. Yes, I think it's the Irish in me that is not very good at self-promotion, but I'll just toss that in there. Just a little piece of advice I got. Okay, let's go ahead and get into these stories. Our first story, we go to Chicago, Illinois, just over a decade ago, and check in with a young man named Vincent Richardson. As far back as Vincent could remember, he wanted to be a police officer. Part of the reason had to do with the fact that Vincent's stepfather was a policeman, but even at an age as young as 5, Vincent was a dedicated viewer of the TV show Cops. Now, for those that may not know, Cops was a reality TV show before that genre really took off. It centered on riding along with police officers from various different cities in the U.S. as they responded to calls. And as Vincent got older, his infatuation with being a police officer grew even stronger, beyond just watching a TV show. And his mother respected and supported his interest, and when he was old enough, she signed him up for the Chicago Police Department's Youth Explorer program. The Youth Explorer program was more or less a Boy Scout centered on police work, where explorers could get a lot of the same training a police officer would receive, minus the training for firearms. And explorers would even work with the police at the station and have minor roles during community service events. And Vincent took being an explorer very seriously. While he did have friends, he didn't spend a lot of time with them playing video games or hanging out like other kids his age. Vincent spent most of his free time working on explorer projects. Vincent was very smart and a good student, so he would finish his homework quickly and jump into whatever he could do associated with the Youth Explorer program, all to set himself up to be a police officer when he got older. And eventually, Vincent did go to work as a police officer in Chicago's Englewood Station, just a few miles from his own neighborhood. Vincent's first day on the job was simple enough, working a handful of traffic stops. He did assist in one arrest, but there was no resisting, so that went easily. And so it went for Vincent, his first several days. Most days were pretty standard. Vincent and his partner were called to a scene of an accident where the two parties involved were arguing and getting heated. Vincent managed to calm both parties down, and in the end, the two drivers left each other with a handshake. Another day, Vincent and his partner had to chase down a drug dealer, but managed to tackle him and get him back to the police cruiser and off to jail. Other than that, it was basic police work, traffic stops and simply patrolling the area. On January 24th, 2009, Vincent Richardson's life would change forever. Vincent entered Chicago's Grand Crossing police station and informed them he had been assigned to work a shift there from Englewood. Vincent was given a police radio and a ticket book, then assigned a partner and a police cruiser for the day. For the next 5 hours, Vincent and his temporary partner patrolled the south side of Chicago, doing what Vincent did every other day. There was little fanfare. They made a couple of traffic stops, and Vincent did assist in one arrest, placing handcuffs on someone suspected of violating the protective order. It wasn't until Vincent and his partner arrived back at Grand Crossing Station, sometime after noon, that his future as a police officer would come to a grinding halt. The captain, on duty, noticed Vincent, a small, clean-shaven officer he had never seen before. The captain went up to Vincent and asked him to produce a badge. Vincent couldn't. In fact, Vincent couldn't produce a firearm either, as his holster was empty. While Vincent had been working for several days as a police officer, he wasn't a police officer. He had never been hired, he had never gone through official training, and he had never been to an academy. Vincent had been in the Youth Explorer program and in fact was a current member at the time he walked into the Grand Crossing police station in Chicago. Vincent was only 14 years old. It started as a simple mistake. Vincent showed up at the Inglewood station as an explorer, as he had several times before, but with weather getting chilly this time, he wore a dark blue jacket over his explorer uniform. Inadvertently, he was dressed like any cop in the station that day. He happened to arrive in the middle of a shift change, and the assignment officer was new and didn't recognize Vincent as an explorer. Instead of giving him a training assignment, he gave Vincent a radio and a ticket book. Vincent didn't set out to impersonate a police officer, but when they made the mistake of taking him as one, he didn't correct it either. He continued to show up just as the shift change was taking place, dealing with the same assignment officer who continued to give him a radio and ticket book and working with the same partner. The Inglewood station never caught on. It wasn't until he decided to test the waters in another location and showed up at the Grand Crossing station that things came apart, but only after he had worked most of the shift. 14 Chicago police officers faced disciplinary action, and his partners and the captain were suspended without pay for a few days. Vincent was charged as a juvenile with a misdemeanor for impersonating a police officer. The courts were very lenient with Vincent, giving him probation, but he apparently didn't learn his lesson. Vincent repeatedly tried to pass himself off as a police officer, getting arrested on an almost yearly basis. Finally, at the age of 17, he was hit with a charge of unlawful use of a firearm and possession of ammunition. Unable to secure the $50,000 bond, Vincent sat in jail until sentencing, and he was given time served. After that, Vincent tried to go on with regular life. He got his GED, worked as a janitor for a brief period before getting a job as a security guard, but it still wasn't enough. Vincent went into a Chicago uniform shop and told the clerk he was a police officer. A suspicious clerk called the police, but sensing that something was up, Vincent made a run for it. Unfortunately, he had left his wallet on the counter. He was arrested within the hour, and this time charged as an adult with a felony for impersonating a police officer, and eventually sentenced to 18 months in prison. If you think that's where Vincent's story ends, no. Upon getting out of prison, it was something of being in the right place at the right time. He went to work for Amazon, managing logistics just as the world was going into lockdown in 2020. Suddenly being able to access items online became extremely important. He was making good money, had a new car, he had a live-in girlfriend and an apartment in the Chicago suburb of Naperville. But something kept nagging at Vincent about being a policeman, or something like it. Vincent decided to start a security contractor business, basically what are commonly referred to as rent-a-cops. His felony would prevent him from going through the registration process and getting the proper permits, so he just ignored all of it, though he did officially make his company Defense Public Safety Solutions, an LLC. Vincent secured a few contracts and hired his friends to work as security guards. His fall came when he decided to bid on a contract with the Chicago Housing Authority that sought out Chicago police officers in need of moonlight work. Vincent presented himself as a police officer one more time, eventually being exposed and arrested, and he was sentenced to 280 days in prison. Our second story is about William Stuart-Houston, who was born March 12, 1911 in Liverpool, England, to a German father and an Irish mother. When William was only 3 years old, his father went on a trip across Europe while William and his mother, Bridget, stayed in Liverpool. While William's father was on that trip, World War I broke out, and because of travel restrictions, he was unable to return to England. William's father would return to his homeland of Germany, eventually deciding he didn't want to return to England and simply abandoned William and Bridget. William's father bigamously remarried and fathered another son. Sometime in the mid-1920s, a few years after World War I had ended, William's father wrote to his wife in England asking her to send William to live in Germany. Bridget absolutely refused, but by 1929, William was 18 years old, and she told him if he wanted to go to Germany, he could do so with her blessing. Another 4 years passed before William decided to test the waters and move to Germany, doing so just as Adolf Hitler was taking power and turning it into Nazi Germany. When William first arrived, he landed a job at Reichsbank, the central bank for Germany at the time. He held that job through most of the 1930s before going to work for the Opel automobile factory as a car salesman. In 1938, a year or so before the outbreak of World War II, the government approached William about relinquishing his British citizenship in exchange for a high-ranking job. Keep in mind, of course, the government at the time meant the Nazi Party. Suspecting some kind of trap, William fled Germany and returned to England. Upon returning home and reuniting with his mother, William's story of living in Nazi Germany began to circulate. Look magazine even paid William to write an article about his years living under Nazi rule. When American newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst read William's story in January of 1939, he arranged for William and his mother to come to the United States for a lecture tour. It was while on this tour that World War II broke out, and like his father during World War I, William and his mother were unable to return to England because of travel restrictions. William and Bridget decided to stay in the U.S., settling in the Sunnyside neighborhood of Queens, New York, where both of them received their American citizenship. William would ask for special permission from President Franklin Roosevelt to enlist in the United States Navy, which was actually granted in 1944. William served as a pharmacist's mate during the last few months of World War II and would later be discharged in 1947. It was what happened after being discharged from the U.S. Navy that turns this story on its ear. After being discharged from the Navy, William then changed his name to William Stuart Houston, and his mother also changed her name to Bridget Stuart Houston. William Stuart Houston was not the name William had gone by the previous 36 years of life he had lived up to that point. And while his mother had been born Bridget Downing in Dublin, Ireland, her married name was quite different. William's father was Alois Hitler Jr., the half-brother to Adolf Hitler. Bridget's married name was, of course, Bridget Hitler, and William was born William Patrick Hitler. When William left England for Germany in 1933, it wasn't as simple as going to live near his father. William was entering Germany in the early days of Nazi rule with his uncle Adolf at the helm, which is how, as a British-born immigrant, he was able to get fairly cushy jobs at a bank and as a car salesman. Seeing his half-brother Heinz rising through the ranks of the unified armed forces of Nazi Germany, William hoped Uncle Adolf could get him a better job. When it didn't immediately happen, William tried to blackmail Adolf Hitler and threatened to expose embarrassing stories about the family, including that Adolf's paternal grandfather was allegedly a Jewish merchant. When the offer of a high-ranking position came with the condition of giving up his British citizenship, William smelled a rat and fled to England. The article William wrote for Look magazine was titled "Why I Hate My Uncle," and was largely about William dealing with his Uncle Adolf. William not only became an American citizen with the last name Hitler, but when he joined the U.S. Navy after receiving his special permission from President Roosevelt, he did so with the name William Patrick Hitler. It said when William first reported for duty, the induction officer asked for his name. When William said Hitler, the officer thought it was a joke and responded, "Nice to meet you, Hitler. My name is Hess." After changing his name, William met and married a woman named Phyllis who had been born in Germany in the mid-1920s and whose family fled Nazi Germany in the 1930s. They had 4 sons together and, along with William's mother Bridget, did their best to live a life of anonymity in New York. William's half-brother Heinz died in Soviet captivity in 1942, Bridget passed in 1969, and William in 1987. William's wife Phyllis passed in 2004, and his youngest son died in a car accident in 1989. 3 of William's sons are still living as of the making of this video. They are the last known relatives to Adolf Hitler. Our third story belongs to someone that wanted to remain anonymous and did not include specific details like names, locations, or even a time frame. Any names given here are fabricated just to have identifiers to make it a little easier to tell the story. A young man we will call Chad was going into his last semester at college. Chad had always been kind of small and weighed only about 120 pounds. This had made him the target of bullies throughout his life, but Chad hoped things might be a little different in college. While it might not have been a daily thing like it was when he was younger, he still had to deal with it at times. One day early in that final semester, a football player that outweighed him by a good 200 pounds assaulted him for no reason other than the football player thought Chad got in his way. The football player beat him up pretty bad, but it led to the best thing that ever happened to Chad. A wonderful young woman named Heather stopped to help Chad and doctor his wounds. Chad almost immediately fell in love. While Heather certainly wasn't against dating Chad, she didn't make it easy. He had to pursue her for months, competing with a few other potential male suitors. Eventually, Chad won Heather over, and 2 years after they first met, they were married. 9 months after they were married, Heather gave birth to their first child, a daughter. Both Chad and Heather had graduated college at that point, and Chad landed a great high-paying job. The two discussed it, and Heather decided to be a stay-at-home mom rather than hiring a nanny, as Chad made plenty of money to support the family. The family would grow as well, with Heather giving birth to a son when their daughter was 2 years old. Chad loved both of his children and doted on both of them, starting every day spending time with them before he left for work. But his son was definitely a daddy's boy and was the absolute joy of Chad's life. Chad had dreamed of having a son to carry on his name and was now living his dream life. It couldn't have been better. The years passed gracefully. His daughter had started school and was in second grade, just as his son was starting kindergarten. Heather was still happy being a stay-at-home mom, and Chad was rising in the ranks at work. 10 years after Chad and Heather first met, they were financially secure and spent a lot of time together as a family. Then something strange happened. One night, after the kids were in bed for the night and Heather decided to turn in a little early, Chad sat on the couch in the living room watching TV. A lamp in the room started to draw his attention, to the point that he turned the TV off and gave his full attention to the lamp. There was just something off about the lamp, and Chad couldn't figure out what it was. It was a basic lamp, a red base with gold trim and a white square shade. But something was odd about the way it looked. It almost looked inverted. Chad was transfixed. He could not stop staring at the lamp. Chad ended up staying up all night staring at the lamp. Heather came into the living room the next day and asked why he never came to bed. Chad told her he didn't want to get her sick because he didn't feel well and he would be taking a day off work, all the while still staring at the lamp. Heather took their kids to school before running some errands. She came home to find Chad still sitting in the same place, staring at the lamp. This went on for 3 days. Chad only left the couch to use the bathroom, but eventually didn't need to do that as he wasn't eating or drinking anything. Heather was getting worried and tried to get someone to come and talk to Chad, but at this point Chad was almost beyond the ability to respond to her. He was barely aware of anyone else in the room. He simply kept staring at the lamp. Heather decided to take the kids to her mother's house to stay for a while, just as Chad's situation started to come to a bizarre conclusion. The lamp started to grow. It became wider, and the inverted dimensions became more prominent. After a few minutes, the lamp took up Chad's entire perspective. All he could see was the red of the base on the lamp. Chad started to hear distant voices that came closer, but there were so many he couldn't pick out what they were saying. Suddenly, he felt a growing pain that became more severe in a matter of seconds. For the first time in days, he was aware of his physical presence and realized he was missing teeth. After closing his eyes tight for a few seconds, he opened them to see he was laying flat on his back, surrounded by people he didn't know, some of which were acting very disturbed when they looked at him. A police officer appeared and helped Chad to his feet, leading him to a patrol car and telling Chad he didn't want to wait for an ambulance and would take Chad to the hospital himself. Chad asked where his wife was, and the policeman simply told him he didn't know. In the back of the patrol car, Chad's vision started to become more clear. Looking around, he realized he was on the campus of his college in the same place where the football player had assaulted him 10 years earlier. Except it hadn't been 10 years earlier. It had been a matter of minutes. Heather, Chad's son and daughter, his job, his entire married life, and everything else that had happened over the last 10 years was all a figment of Chad's imagination created as Chad lay on the sidewalk unconscious after being beaten by the football player. Chad had CAT scans done and nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but for 3 years he went through a horrible depression because of the loss of a wife and children that never existed. Some of the theories about what happened to Chad include that he had a near-death experience. In his state of unconsciousness, his subconscious was open to an abnormal degree, creating an alternate life. The beating he suffered was so bad it released a massive amount of DMT into his brain, and he experienced 10 years of life in just a matter of minutes. Chad spent years hoping to see his wife and daughter again, perhaps in a vivid dream, but it never happened. He does still sometimes see his son, usually just a glimpse in his peripheral vision as his son is trying to say something to him. His son always appears to him as being 5 years old, and he can never hear what he says. Alright, well, I hope you enjoyed those 3 stories. Hopefully, I'm not sure how long this is going to end up being, because I don't want to go on too long about this. But next time, as you know, I've been doing a lot of pro wrestling stuff on the YouTube channel. And I'm going to post something in the community section of the YouTube channel. I think for the next podcast, what I'd like to do is something simple, just talking about how pro wrestling fans became fans and just some of those stories. I was going to try and keep the podcast and the channel kind of separate, but it'll be a meeting of those 2 things, much to the chagrin of some people, I know, because not everybody is a pro wrestling fan. But I'm still trying to figure out what to do with this whole podcast thing. But look for that in the community section. And also down the line, CRX Paranormal has brought up trying to do, we're just kind of a little discussion thing. If I can never figure out how to set that up and figure out a way to do it, it's really hard for me to even do this with my schedule. But we may try and do something like that too, centered on pro wrestling down the line. But I do hope you enjoyed the strange stories. If you'd like me to keep doing stuff like this, let me know. But for now, please like, share, comment, and subscribe, not necessarily in that order. And I will see you next time.